When it comes to running your own business, photos and images are absolutely essential. So, today's video, I'm going to run you through, not as fast as possible because that'd be too hard to keep track of, but quite a speedy run through of the bare minimum basics you might need to use Photoshop in your business. We're talking about e-commerce primarily, so editing product photos, just little touch-ups, changing colours, cropping, moving, all the basic stuff. If you want to know advanced things, I am not your man, but this is all I've needed to run my business, which is Mercs. So check it out if you're nosy and interested. If not, we'll make a start. So, diving into Photoshop. For product photos and editing, we're talking about an e-commerce image that is going to be the primary image. I go for 2000 by 2000 pixels by 300 resolution. That gives enough pixel density and resolution to look sharp on a zoom, but also it's not too big to where the file size is inconvenient. So that's what seems to work for me. Other than that, don't mess about with other settings. I will not tell you about settings that are irrelevant. I don't change all my setup down the edge and the side. I don't really do much. I don't configure it all. This is a pretty straightforward Photoshop, I believe. Right, we need a product to edit. So this is what we're going to start with. It's a picture of a weightlifting belt. As you can see, that is literally taken on the floor in my front room. That's it. It's not even a great photo. So, to start off, you can drag and drop photos straight in, however you like. To carry on with this, obviously click to move it, click enter, and that will get you off the transformation tool. But if you want to get back onto it, Control plus T, that gets you back on to the transformation tool. Transformation is good, except if you want to maintain the aspect ratio by not making it all skew with, you hold shift while you're sliding it, and then it will only go and maintain that same aspect ratio. So that's really helpful when you want to keep the size and the scale of an image like now. So what I tend to do is to start out. So we've got that there, we've scaled it up just where we want, enter. There's a few ways now to cut that product out. As you can see, I've done a bit of a scrappy white background. That is literally pieces of paper. Nothing fancy at all. Back when this photo was taken in 2018, 2019, you had to use this tool, which would draw around, you'd go all the way around the shape, and then you'd have a selection. These days, so to get rid of that, Control and D, deselect. These days, there is a fancier little tool called Object Selection Tool. This thing is amazing. So, down here, we've got two layers. Layers are basically how the image stacks on top of the image. So if I were to bring another image in, for example, like this one, that layer is on top of this other one now, so that is above it. So whatever we do to this layer here will be on top of the one below. If you wanted that to go behind, you just drag and drop these up and down. So as you can see, that's there, and you just drag and move, but we don't want that, so click delete. Bring that back to the center. What I tend to do is use this. So it's called the Object Selection Tool, and look, it just highlights it. It almost knows exactly what you want. Sometimes, hovering over the item, product, person, it knows. If it's not quite sure, you can start in fresh air and just drag a box over it. Doesn't have to be super neat. This is not what you're cutting out exactly, but this, in theory, should do you a rough cut, if not a perfect cut. It's got so good at this point that it's nearly perfect. So now that we've got that, what do we do next? Control and C, Control and V. Now, as you can see down here, we've got two layers. One of them is for just the cutout, which is that. And if you turn off the little eyeballs, that will show different things on the layers. All we want is this. So now we've got a product. Control T, Shift and move to scale it up. So this is what it's going to look like roughly when it's finished. These little guidelines are useful sometimes if you want to get something perfectly centered, but then again, we're still in the early stages. We can work on that later. So you look at this to start off. So hypothetically, we don't want this little tab. It's just a little bit of Velcro on the edge of the belt. What I would do personally is come up to this tool here, this one there, the polygonal lasso tool. So what we do is zoom in, just to make life easier. If you zoom in too far, it gets to like a pixel checkerboard and you start to see too close to the pixels. We don't want that. I like to zoom out just enough to where the photo looks like the photo. Something like that. So where you can still maintain what you're seeing, but you've also got the fine detail. Right, so we want to cut this little tab off. Zoom right in, not too far, just about there. Starting fresh air, come in. We're just using the left click to roughly go down and trace the outline of this product, of what we want to cut off. If you scroll up and down, I'm not doing any scrolling or any movement here, it will just follow the edge of the page. So you can come down. If you wanted, you could go around these little fluffy bits, but considering they're just little fluffy bits that we don't need, we're just going to cut them straight off. So come down this edge. This tool does use a series of straight lines. For some people, some applications, that's not what you want. For the majority of what I do, even round shapes, I tend to use this quite a lot. So press Alt and scroll, and that'll zoom us back out, but no clicking. And then, because we want to cut that entire tab off, we want to take a cut into fresh air, fresh air, fresh air, and you should be able to press Enter, and then it connect them back up. Photoshop is full of glitches. Sometimes Enter doesn't work and you have to actually go and click right on your start point. There's loads of silly things like that. So now we've cut that out. What do we do with it? Make sure we're on the right layer, because that would, in theory, cut that out of that layer if we wanted. If we press delete now, because it's a smart object, so we're going to, so if you ever get popped up where it says it's a smart object, that's that little thing here. Click on that, click rasterize, not a word I've ever said out loud. Click rasterize layer. That takes off the little smart object. Once again, couldn't tell you why, couldn't tell you what it does, but sometimes that'll trip you up. So because we've cut that shape out, that would in theory cut that out of there. We don't want to cut that out of there, so we need to make sure we're on the right layer in the right place. We now press delete, that has now gone. Control D, and we're back. So now we've just deleted that completely. Right, so now we've got what you could consider a product, but two things. John, it's blue. I know, now that it's on a white background with proper colours and contrast, it is very blue. The temperature of that image is very cold. Not ideal. But what I like to do first, try not to knock the mic, is see all these little lines, these little scuffs, these little marks, these little dots, bits of fluff, imperfections. We're just going to tidy up a few of these, and we're going to use the clone stamp tool. That's this one over here, over this side. So there's a pattern stamp and the clone stamp. We mainly use the clone stamp. Sorry. So whatever you hold Alt, and whatever you select, say that piece there, and you click, that will now copy that piece there to paste wherever you want. It does a weird thing where if you move from that same place to the right, it will shift where its little targeting piece was to the right. So in theory, if I click on the top of there and go and pop that there, hold down and scroll, it is duplicating the image further down, which is, it gets really bizarre if you go too far with it. That is not something you'd ever do, obviously. We're going to use this for the fluff. So if you go up to the top corner, there is size and hardness. Hardness is how sharp that circle is. So it's easy to describe it when it's not as hard. So let's put it down to 30%. We take a stamp of that bit there, roughly, and now look at the faded edges to it. So that can be really good when you want a nice blend, or if you want something to blend in really well, sometimes the softness can really be helpful. Turn it up to 100% hardness, click on that and stamp that. Now look at that, look at the sharp edges that it creates. It creates such a nice neat circle, which is useful sometimes, but not useful all the times. So we're going to be using maybe a size, probably maybe 10 or 15 pixels. We want quite a low hardness. I'm going to put 20%. Why? I just think that might work okay. All we're doing is hiding imperfections. So hold Alt, click on a place that is perfectly smooth, a bit like there. So hold Alt, click, and then if you drag down over that piece and click again with your left click, that has now been hidden. This is not done on a layer. This is a modification to this layer. Sometimes when you make modifications to layers, you end up with different bits and cutouts. Not on this one, it's nice and easy. So what I would do typically is go around, find the nicest, closest bit, and then literally just drop over and clone stamp it out. The clone stamp has a strange feature where it moves. So say this bit here, there's a little bit of a mucky mark, as there is in quite a few areas. So what we're going to do is click below it, just off to the side, and then move up, and then we can kind of just drag across. And you see where the little crosshair is? That's where it's picking from. So in theory, if you go too far, you'll get like a weird shape. You'll start pulling in whatever's below, and you can do weird things by like moving the image. We don't want that. We just want to click slightly below, trying to keep the same gradient. That's quite a tough one. As you can see here, so see the dark part here. As we move round, it gets lighter and lighter. You couldn't pick apart from the light bit and pop it into the dark bit, because you'll end up cloning in that exact same part. And as you can see, that just stands out ridiculous. Equally, you can't put the dark into the light. It is literally just copying from one place to another. So let me go through and whip out some of these. So this bit here, because we've got a good line underneath of clarity, let's just fly through this, rubbing some of these out. We'll go and do the finer bits shortly, but I tend to go through, do all the big bits, do all the easy bits, get all the obvious ones out the way, and just do a quick, we call it a rough cut. We're just tidying things up here, and then we're going to come in with the details later. Bear in mind, this is extremely detailed for what some people would consider acceptable. I get it. Like, everybody's got their own tolerance to what they want their photos to look like. This, I don't agree that this is making the product look artificial. It's just making it look its best. Sometimes there's photos of, dramatic example, the Kardashians, where they edit photos and then no longer look like the edit. And it's like, that's now not you, and that feels disingenuous. For this, no, this is just a piece of string. Like, yours will probably come without a scuff and a scratch on it. That's the plan. So this bit here, as you can see, this whole band of this rubber patch is on a curve. So that means if we picked a piece from here, we couldn't drop that in because of where the curve is. But if the curve is sort of shallow enough, like it is, we can click just next door, move that up, and still just get away with colouring that in. See how that's just completely gone now? Same again with this. So there's a little piece there. That'd be really quite hard to get if you wanted to try and come over, get right really small, try and stamp on there. So what we'll do is we'll go a bit bigger. We'll turn up the hardness slightly, maybe just to 40%. And then we will pick a part on that line because of how consistent that line is. It's perfectly straight. It's not perfectly level, but it's almost perfectly straight. So we'll just pick a part just to the side and then come back over, line that black line up where it would be in real life, and then click. And now that bit has gone. You might think, oh, that's just a bit too high. It is. Control and Z, that just drops you back. So if you want to just do it again, you think, oh, that just doesn't look quite how I want. That's fine. You can just adjust and manipulate as you go. So we'll get some more of the easy ones. Same with this bit. That's quite a tricky bit, because if you look, the whites at the top and the whites at the bottom, and there's the blacks and the shadows, and it's like, oh, that's quite a tricky piece. Try and pick a part that is consistent. So I choose an edge. So I'll choose an edge maybe just there. So then we've clicked on that, we move down, we blend that edge in just where we want it to be. Click, hold, and just drag down a fraction. And then that little crosshair at the side has just moved down, so the whole circle has just been copied slightly lower. Now that piece is perfectly clean. Same again with this, another piece that would be really hard to get to. Pick a piece that's known, like that black edge, which we're going to try and replicate. Come over there, drop it in. And that's that gone. So this is how we go over the image. Even that bit, like, the thing is, I've got OCD. Just a smidge, but just enough to be diagnosed it and on medication for it. There are some bits that are insignificant, and I know this, and you know this. See on the G there, it just folds around that corner. It just looks a little bit like that bit just bows out. This is stupidity. You don't even need to mess with this, but this is how you do it. So same again, follow that line down, hold Alt, click on that bit, and then move up, and then just blend that line in just where you want. Now, that's just got a bit of a straighter profile. Was that important? Absolutely not. But did we do it anyway? Yeah, sometimes we do stupid things like that. So, we've still got some marking on here. Let's try and fly round. This is another easy piece. So, same again, line that up. And because we've got that one there, we can line that up and get the 2 for 1. Another bit there, little pointy bit. Why is there a pointy bit? Don't know. It could be an artifact in the photo. It could be anything. Now it's gone. That's fine. Any more bits? You could argue that that bit's a bit odd. Yeah, it's fine. Once again, we've got rid of most of the insignificance. This bit up here, so we'll just click on there, drag over to there, and then up we go. And now that bit's just gone. So that now looks loads better in comparison to the original. So that was the original, that was ours. In fact, what we'll do is we'll double click, we'll reduce the opacity so we can barely see it. Control and T, and then we'll just scale it down to where it's roughly the same size. Double click, opacity back to 100%, and now we can just click between them both and roughly see the difference. The main bit is this big stripe down the middle. To me, that stands out by a mile. And all the little imperfections, the bits of dust, the nuanced details that are just cleaned up. Even across the Mergs logo, there's just bits of scraps that are now gone. Anyway, moving on. You might now be looking at this thinking, John, still the wrong colour, mate. Why is it blue? We're getting there. It shouldn't be blue, I promise. Right, so what we do is, when I am personally doing an image, I will try and make sure that it is as close to the edge without touching the edge, but by leaving what I'd consider a couple of millimeters. And that's different depending on what screen you're on. That's not the point. The point is, you don't literally need to be touching the edge. It doesn't need to be like that, because there might be a time where you get your pixels cut off and you end up with a little flat spot, or we don't need to be so close like that. So we just don't need that. So if we undo that now, brightness and contrast, levels, curves, exposure, vibrance, hue and saturation, colour balance. Half of these you won't use or need. We'll start off with what we'd probably call the obvious ones, brightness and contrast. So if you click on that, that inserts another layer. So whatever you do to this layer, as it stands, will affect every part of the image. So let's pretend there was a background to this. This will affect every part of every layer of all this image. We do not want that. So we right click and click create clipping mask. That will tie this layer to the one below it, as you can see with the underline, and nothing else. So we can change the darkness and brightness on this now, and it doesn't affect anything else. In this instance, that layer is irrelevant, just for demonstration purposes. So let's get that back to 0. You can type into there 0. I think as well you can also hover over this and scroll. So if you hover over the number and scroll, you can get the fine increments, which sometimes is easier than trying to move the fiddly thing. So brightness and contrast. What we want from this relay is for it just to look black. So the ones I tend to use are brightness and contrast, exposure, once again, create clipping mask. That's how to release the clipping mask if you decide, no, I don't want that. Or what you could do is you can just delete. You got to delete twice, but then it's gone. So we want exposure, create clipping mask, and also hue and saturation, create clipping mask, and vibrance, create clipping mask. We won't or may not use all of these. We will be deleting any that we don't touch. Sometimes it's not always obvious what needs to be moved, how much. It's not always clear. So for this example, we're just going to start with a few different ones. The one that I find the most challenging to use, because I don't understand it well enough, is exposure. This feels so intense, the way it adjusts things and moves things. One tiny little move on here can really make a mess of an image. But these are not things I tend to start with as default. They tend to be things that we'll use to finish off at the end. So hue and saturation, the saturation. This is quite a good one because it's tying in more of the blue or less of the blue. We don't want to go to where we look black and white. We don't want monochrome, but we do just want to reduce the saturation slightly. Maybe to about there. So again, still looks a bit foggy. Vibrance. Oh wait, sorry, hue and saturation. Yeah, so we reduce the saturation. Vibrance, saturation once again. Right. So we've made some adjustments and modifications to this image. It looks black again now. It looks back to black. Control T, it looks a little bit wonky, but we're talking like a tiny bit. Sometimes I use the edge of the screen just to sort of square things up. That looks quite reasonable. I'm just looking at this tiny gap here versus this gap here. That's not far off. They're about equal-ish. Pop him down in the middle. Now, compare that to the old one. So bring that one back. That's what the old one looked like. So if we bring that just up there or down here, that's how much we can change, modify and edit an image to look how we want it to. They look worlds apart. They don't even look like the same photograph. But with some tweaking and finessing, we can make it look how we want. Right, so we've got what we want. We don't need you. Goodbye. Get you up into the center, left and up and down. Up and down is not working. Control T. Let's get him somewhere near the edge, but not too close. Something like that. Right, so we've got our image. We're quite happy with that. It'll do for now. Don't forget, you can always come back and change this later. First thing to do, always, always, always save it as a Photoshop file. So File, Save As. That will save it as a Photoshop file. That's kind of what that does. So come on to this. Go down there, go to Images 1. So we want to save it as Black Belt Edited. That'll do. Save that as a Photoshop file. This doesn't really give you many options. Save that as a PSD, save. Maximize compatibility, yes, cool. That is now saved. So if our computer exploded right now, it might not be there, it's on a hard drive. But you know what I mean. If the power went off, we've got that. We also want to save it as a usable file format. So save as copy. Same again, go back into the same folder. I tend to save it as the same thing. Sometimes it'll let you, sometimes it won't. But because it's not a PSD, now we get all these different options. I tend to use JPEG. That's just standard, it's straightforward, the file size is not too big. Now that other one's gone, so you can call this the exact same thing, and the other one will be .psd, this will be .jpg. Cool. Then we get this. This is useful if you want to save a file in a smaller format. This, you'd be like, why would I want a lower quality image? Sometimes on Shopify, when you're uploading a photo, or different platforms have a limit to how much storage that image can take up. Some of them it's 2 megabytes, some of them it's 5. So we're going to keep this. It doesn't make a difference. We can't get any higher. It's 1.3. That's fine. So put the quality as high as it can. Format options. I don't know what they mean. They've never been any use to me. So ignore those. Okay. And now that is saved as a JPEG. You might think, oh, John, how do I save this with a transparent background so I can use it in things like Canva? This is easy. We want to go down to the bottom layer, the background, turn that off. And now that the background's off, these white and grey squares mean there's nothing there. Although it looks like there's something there, that is an image with nothing there. So what you can do, if you wanted, you can click on the crop tool. We can drag down from the top. If this was for, shall we say, graphic design work, and we can just squeeze that in, enter. Now we've got that cropped a little bit neater. File, save as copy once again, go down, now we want PNG. So as you can see, the background layer is still turned off. We've still just got the product with no background, even though it looks like there is. Save it as a PNG. We can save that, and I save that as transparent, because I tend to use these images in Canva, in graphic design, in bundle images, and you don't always want to drop the full square in. You just need exactly what you need. So we'll call that transparent. Save. Same again, large file size. That tends to be, because this file size is just never too big. It's fine. Okay. So you've just saved that, and you're like, but I wanted that back where I wanted. Control Z. There you go. Back to normal. You can pop your background back in. And that's about it for today's super quick, fast lesson. This was probably a 20-minute video, but that should be most things you need to know to get a white background on a photo. I hope this made sense. If you like this video, subscribe, and if you don't, then, well, don't. It's fine. Anyway, I've got more work to do. I'm going to get back to work. You should too. Have a wonderful rest of your day.